It's been more than 30 years since the initial release, and the prince still doesn't have an official name. But when it comes to Prince of Persia, many people say that the Sands of Time trilogy is the best out of the series. The game is even being remastered. Sadly, they've delayed the release to work on it more. But to look at the attributes of Sands of Time, it is solely based on one thing: time travel. As much as we like that trope in media, there are many logical and philosophical issues with time travel itself. In 2009, the late scientist Stephen Hawking attempted to prove this by hosting a party. However, he sent invitations only after the party had taken place. This was indeed a party for time travelers. He believed that the invitation would last thousands of years and someone from the future would be inspired to appear. And as much as Stephen Hawking claimed, no one showed up, unfortunately. This even further pokes holes in the idea of time travel when you look at the main points that make up the environment for time travel desirable. The first reason is called the Hitler paradox. Let's say that your goal was to go back to the 1890s and remove a young Adolf Hitler either by killing him or raising him somewhere else in seclusion. The hope would be that this stops World War II and the Holocaust from happening. Now, let's say that this does happen. That is exactly where the problem would lie. Neither World War II nor Hitler would exist in books. They would not be taught in schools. There would be no movies about them because they never happened. Growing up, you would have never learned about Hitler or World War II and would not have the desire to go back in time and remove him. You, as the would-be assassin, would have essentially come from nothing, which doesn't make sense. With me so far? Because there's more. Another problem with time travel is called the grandfather paradox. Let's say that you went back in time to either kill your grandfather when he was young, or at least stop him from meeting your grandmother. But that would mean you were never born, which also means that no one would have existed to remove your grandfather, which means that in the end you were actually born, and then you were capable of going back in time to remove your grandfather, and the cycle would continue. The whole thing would result in an infinite time loop of the process that you created. Another reason is something called the bootstrap paradox. Let's say that you went back in time with all the works of William Shakespeare. You find him before he wrote them and hand them over, and he uses the works to become the famous playwright that you and I know today. But where did Shakespeare's work come from? It wasn't Shakespeare since he copied what you gave him, and it wasn't you since you traveled back through time to return it to him. Shakespeare's work would therefore have no origin point. It would have essentially come from nothing, which, doesn't make sense. Another reason why time travel might not exist is because of the tourists argument. How come we have had no tourists from the future showing up? Now, there are people who have claimed to have come from the future, but none of them have proven their method of time travel, nor have they accurately been able to predict certain facts. Now, some people might argue there's something like a time police, which stops people from going back in time and altering the timeline or informing us of the existence of time travel. But the problem is that crime and fighting crime in general is more or less an arms race. Eventually, some criminals are going to find a way to outwit the police and go back in time and break the law. It is simply illogical to assume that 10 billion people, or how many people we will have in that future, that of all of them, no one will have the ability to break the law and find some way to alert us of time travel. Now, new reason also goes with the logical argument. Basically, the past is something that doesn't exist anymore. It is something that has passed already and is no longer happening. You can't go to a place that doesn't exist. And the same thing goes with the future. The future does not exist yet. We haven't arrived there yet. And with the same thing, you cannot go to some place that does not exist. All of this applies to the Sands of Time trilogy. So everyone remembers the emotional scene when the prince tries to save Farah, but he fails, and then he learns that he doesn't have the sand to reverse time to save her. This is a metaphor which shows that there is no way to reverse death even with time travel. It is the same in real life. Let's say that the prince did reverse time and save Farah from her death. She would have never died, which would eliminate the prince's desire to go back in time to save her. It's a classic example of the Hitler paradox. H.G. Wells had an interesting idea when he wrote the book The Time Machine, but it doesn't add up to real life, simply when you take into account these philosophical and logical reasons. The same will apply to supernatural sand.